Hey, good morning, everyone. This is Kevin here at Tevora. We're excited to dive in and kind of start this webinar and share with you the state of email phishing in 2021. I have Truman Kane on the line, who's one of our senior social engineering consultants, and he can go ahead and take us through some of the techniques we're seeing by attackers and the mitigations out there. And hopefully it's something interesting. And if you have any questions, feel free to jump in, and we'll be excited to answer them. So go ahead, Truman, and take it away.
All right, thanks, Kevin. Yeah, my name's Truman Kane. I'm excited to share this with you today. I appreciate your patience while we're just getting set up here, so I'm going to go ahead and jump into it here. So again, my name's Truman Kane. I've been doing primarily social engineering at Tevora, where I am a senior information security consultant, penetration tester. I've done quite a bit of phone phishing, email phishing, and physical penetration testing during my time at Tevora. I've spoken at DEF CON a couple times. A few years ago on a social engineering framework called Dragnet that I developed and presented, and in 2019 on a Tesla surveillance station development framework that I created, both of which can be used during social engineering situations. The first being email phishing, using AI to kind of target specific users, and the latter used during physical penetration testing for things like recon. So to kind of give a brief overview of what we're going to talk about, which you may have seen on the invite, we're going to go over the latest phishing techniques, some of which that aren't necessarily in the news or talked about, but that we've seen and that we're using successfully. Then getting into preparing your employees to empower them to help defend against these attacks, and then also hardening your organization against these types of attacks and the types of attacks that you may have been seeing recently. Then we'll get into some Q&A after that. So the increasing phishing threat is just that. The graph is up and to the right, and you're not going to see too many real memes here, aside from maybe on the next slide, but phishing and social engineering just continue to increase as a vector and as a jumping off point for attacks that lead to things like data breaches. You're seeing ransomware everywhere, and this isn't going away. As I'm sure you know, it's a real threat. Sometimes it can be hard to allocate budget to things like security awareness training, social engineering penetration testing, and that is a kind of a nuanced point, is that sometimes you have these security awareness training platforms that you're kind of getting a run-of-the-mill templated emails, but it's not the type of thing that you're going to see from an advanced persistent threat. And that's one of the types of, not to get into an advertisement here, that's one of the types of social engineering penetration tests that I really enjoy doing, is a type of program that we call APT, where it's kind of an ongoing thing, and we take the standpoint of an advanced persistent threat and don't stop until we get in, whether that is a drip feed over the course of a year, targeting different users. That's the type of thing that you can't really do with the current security awareness training platforms out there. But it's the type of thing that a sophisticated attacker or a nation state or someone that's just well-funded, or maybe is just targeting your company, is going to be running, versus the standard run-of-the-mill social engineering or security awareness training platform. On top of that, we have people working from home. They've got all types of distractions. They have family running around, which there's nothing wrong with that, and obviously it's no one's fault. But it's a fact, is that you're not necessarily in work mode the same way you might be if you're at the office versus when you're at home. In addition to that, sure, you may be on VPN, but a lot of the time you may not be on VPN when you're at home, so the visibility is not there. Again, ransomware is just ramping up. We're seeing smaller and smaller organizations targeted than were ever targeted before, and that even brings into question national security concerns around, if you have SCADA, or if you're or you're in healthcare and things of those natures. We're just seeing these types of attacks ramp up with no sign of slowing down. I'm going to move on. I tend to talk quite a bit, so this will be the meme for this deck. So, and you may have seen it before, but really I want to stress that ransomware is not slowing down. And if you think, oh, we're not a threat because we're not SCADA, we're not healthcare, I would change my mind about that right now, because I think it's just too lucrative for these attackers, and there aren't really any consequences. So I don't see this slowing down anytime soon. All right, let's get into the latest techniques. So the first one being banner spoofing, and this is something that you may have seen online. There's been some buzz about it recently, and we've used it successfully quite a few times recently over the past quarter. So this is when you have, you want to go into Exchange as an Exchange admin, and you want to add an external sender banner to warn your colleagues that, hey, this email was sent from someone outside of the organization. And sometimes you will prepend the subject line, sometimes you'll prepend or append the email with a banner that is specific to your organization. It's got a certain look to it, a certain color, certain wording, and people get used to it. And it does help, but when it's possible for an attacker to remove this banner, which it is, very trivially, well, then that sense of security is gone. If people are used to being able to trust an email, if a banner isn't there and an attacker can trivially remove that banner, well, that's a problem. And that's with the current state. In addition to that, and I'll get into this a little bit further, but in addition to that, it's not only possible to remove a banner. You might be thinking, okay, well, what if I put an internal safe sender banner? I've got one for external, I've got one for internal. So, if this email was sent from within the organization, I'm going to put a banner in there that says, oh, this email looks to be from within the organization. Well, those can leak. If you're emailing with someone, an attacker, not knowing it at the time, those types of banners can leak. And if an email is forwarded, then the internal banner can be shown to an attacker during recon, and then the banner can be spoofed so that an attacker sending a phishing email will show to the end user or target the internal banner. So it's a problem all around. That's one major technique that's being used. Harmless attachments are another technique that we've seen recently. Everyone, you send an email with an exe attachment, that's typically not going to get through, and it's going to be flagged right away. Well, PDFs are being sent with links to web pages that then push malicious downloads. HTML files are being attached that then, once opened, load JavaScript that points to something malicious or pushes a malicious download, or the standard link in a phishing email going to a web page that is pushing a download. So the last one is not necessarily an attachment, but again, any of these files can have links within them. So all attachments should basically, the point here is that the techniques are outsmarting the software controls in place meant to help defend against these types of attachment attacks. And this is another technique that I think is really interesting. We haven't seen it too much in the wild, but I think this type of attack is going to increase in the near future, is when you get an email, and I'm sure you can all think back to a time you've gotten an email and it's a partner of an organization, and it says, hey, finish setting up your account for this, whatever it is, this type of training that you have to do, because the organization has kind of bought into a certain program, and everyone in the organization gets access to the software. You click on the link, your email is already filled in, all you have to do is put in a password. There's going to be a tendency for your users to put in the password that they typically associate with that email address, oftentimes being the Active Directory password. So when the email or username is already filled in, it's going to, the sense of security is going to be there for the user. They're not going to be as vigilant. So really, I would look out for that in the near future, is the types of attacks where email and username are already filled in, and just trying to warn users against any dropping of the guard. All right, let's get more into preparing employees. So password managers are something typically that people don't just come out and say you need to use a password manager. It's more talking about password strength, but I think there needs to be a shift towards advocating for actual password managers, like 1Password, KeePass, LastPass. That there needs to be a push for that, because not only is this going to help, this is going to help users across the board. So there's this security hygiene that people take with them from home to work and from work to home. and it's a cycle, and one feeds the other. So if you're advocating for password managers, if people get used to, and a lot of these password managers, I think 1Password, for an example, and I'm pushing for them specifically, but I'm pretty sure that there are organizational plans that give users personal accounts that they can use at home. So again, that's just kind of feeding what I just talked about. It's true that one feeds the other in terms of the security hygiene from work to home. They need to be used, because just telling someone to use a long secure password that's unique for everything, that lasts for about 2 minutes, because there's just too many accounts being created constantly. When these passwords are reused, that is just handing over the keys to your organization. And it's true that all you really need is one person to click a link and enter credentials. All you really need is one workstation, and with enough time, you're almost always going to be able to pivot and get and work through the organization from one jumping off point. But you don't need someone to enter credentials if they're reusing a password, and then one place where that password is being used is breached. These breaches happen constantly. These password databases are growing constantly. So all people have to do is just password spray. That's why password reuse is so bad. And if you can't use a standalone password manager, look to something like Okta or similar that have password managers built in, or a type of mechanism to log in and essentially save the passwords that way. But again, I really think there needs to be a push. I know budgets are always a constraint, but I think password managers are one of the main things that need to be advocated for if they aren't already within organizations. So this is something where you always see people on Slack talking about how half their day is ruined to updates, but these updates are protecting against, almost always in the update notes, I would say 9 times out of 10, there's a bunch of, or there's a few little feature pushes, and then at the end, miscellaneous security updates. The majority of these updates are security updates. And when we do a phishing campaign, sometimes we have a click and we rate it as a medium risk. And then we have a credential and we rate it as a high risk. But sometimes we have someone who clicks and we rate it as a critical risk. Why? Because their browser was vulnerable to, their browser version had a RCE vulnerability. So that's a major problem. They click on a link and instantly we have a shell on their computer. That is why updates are so very, very important. So getting your employees to understand that these updates are critical to the security of your organization is something that needs to be done. And with so much bring your own device in terms of mobile updates are just as important. It is kind of scary how often Android and Apple increasingly recently vulnerabilities are discovered that are very serious vulnerabilities. So it may seem like it's not within the organization's purview to urge people to update their mobile devices, but if you have any type of bring your own device, and again with the kind of cycle of that security hygiene I spoke about, getting people into a mindset of updates are good instead of updates are annoying, or every time I update my phone slows down, or whatever it is, this needs to change, because especially if you're targeted at some point, having out-of-date software is one surefire way to be exploited pretty quickly. And you'll see this as a theme moving forward. I'll kind of jump into more of the condensed slides here, because it looks like if we're targeting 30 minutes, I only got 12 minutes left, and I want to be able to take some questions. So continued on this is trusted domains. This is kind of a newer concept, but one I'm kind of working through. We have an internal tool that we're developing to see if we can kind of ease the rollout of this. But when you're telling your employees during a teachable moment, let's say you're running a phishing simulation campaign, and you tell your employees, oh, you should have noticed that link, that wasn't one of our links. Well, what is the question that comes to mind that an employee is going to ask after that? Well, what domains are trusted? What domains does our organization have? Who knows? If you have some type of production or development environment, well, the domains typically there's a jumping off point where it's like, okay, we've got one domain versus we've got multiple domains. No one really knows all the domains that our company owns. if you have a development side, that is pretty common. So there needs to be a place that you can point employees to. If you're ever in a teachable moment message going to say you should have noticed that this domain wasn't contoso.com, well, there needs to be a place that you can point employees that shows the domains that are trusted and that are owned and controlled by your corporation. It can just be on a Confluence page or a wiki. It can be so far as to have an internally spun up website where someone can paste in a link and you can tell them, yes, this is a trusted domain, or no, it's not. But just telling employees that a phishing link should have been detected because it's not a trusted domain is not good enough. Also, I've been kind of making this a point for the past couple of years. Anytime I talk to clients, is that there needs to be not only an open door policy between employees and the security operations center or the security team and or IR team, but people need to be able to put a name to the face, feel welcomed talking to these people, and know that it's not, you know, sometimes when people click on links and enter credentials and download things that they're not supposed to, sometimes they're doing it because they think they're worried that they did something wrong. You know, on phone phishing calls, sometimes we'll use the pretext that you may have downloaded something. We just want to do some scans to make sure it wasn't malicious, and then that person's alarm bells are going off for them. They're thinking, oh no, I hope I didn't put my organization in jeopardy. And I know I'm not supposed to give my password to this person over the phone because we acting as the attacker. Okay, what's your password? They know they're not supposed to give their password. Sometimes they'll even say that. Actually, often they will. But and whatever we say is a rebuttal, they justify it because they're worried that they put their organization in danger, and they want to make sure that the organization is safe. They're trying to protect the organization. So by taking people who work in the security operations center team, security team, or the IR team, and having them personally over Zoom, hopefully with the screen, you know, or hopefully face to face, telling them, we will never ask for your password. That is going to be a much stronger image in their head versus, oh, it said in an email, we're never supposed to give our password. So you want the conviction of your employees to be so strong when an attacker is asking for a password that they do not give the password because they know they're not supposed to, but they're still doing it. Let's get into hardening the organization. What else you can do aside from preparing your employees? So multi-factor everywhere. This is sometimes, I think it's a convenience thing sometimes. Why, you know, two-factor or multi-factor isn't enforced, but as often as possible it needs to be. And this is again something where that's going to save you if someone is reusing a password, is being able to have that second factor coming through in an email. You know, maybe every time, if not every time, then when it's a new device, but I would push her, you know, every time. Obviously, I tend to go on the one extreme. Another would be a hardware token or key, like a YubiKey or other. And if you can't enforce something like that, then maybe getting rid of the password altogether with magic links or passwordless links. You may have seen this. Slack is a pretty notorious one that has that as an option that you may see. But again, this is something that needs to be pushed. And again, into more of a collective slide here. So if you currently are using a external sender banner, and an internal sender banner, I would urge you to get rid of the internal sender banner because of the fact that these can be spoofed. It's even worse if an attacker can spoof an internal sender banner versus just removing the external sender banner, because of the fact that it's the most increased false sense of security if a victim sees the internal banner. So I'd get rid of that. And I would let your employees know you're getting rid of it. And so that if you see it, that's a problem, that's a red flag. In addition to that, Microsoft is pushing for their own, Microsoft is rolling out a native external sender it's not going to be a banner anymore. It's actually going to be native within the application. So look out for that. That's rolling out. Some of you may already have access to it. And I'll try to, when we release these slides, I'll try to put a link to that in the slides for you. Continue testing as often as possible in terms of phishing simulation. The organizations that we see perform best when we're running our phishing are the organizations that test the most often, not only with us, but with their own security awareness training platforms. Obviously, I'm sure that this won't be a shock to any of you, is that anytime someone fails a phishing simulation campaign, there needs to be an enforced password reset. In addition, passwords should be audited constantly against breach data, open source breach data, having been pwned, things like that. And pushing in that complexity. It's pretty stunning how fast passwords that are, something like 8 or 9 characters can be, password hashes can be cracked. It's pretty crazy. So yeah, the complexity needs to be there. If Kevin's around and wants to jump on and talk about the minimum complexity requirements, feel free. But really, the auditing is something, especially against breach data, that I think is highly important. And then having that
please. I think you hit the nail on the head earlier, Truman, that humans are just not designed to memorize high entropy random strings, right? So passwords in general are just kind of unfortunate that they aren't a good fit for what humans are good at. So things like password managers, things like relying more on MFA over the security of the passwords are really important. But yeah, there's definitely some complexity things to recommend. As early as 2016, realized that some of the complexity requirements were actually counterproductive, and that people would do things like November 2021 ! Right, to meet those complexity requirements and rotation requirements, and they ended up because we're bad at memorizing high entropy strings, they would make low entropy strings that did meet the complexity requirement and were easy to remember when they were rotated. So there is some where you can shoot yourself in the foot if you are requiring like a special character and things like that. And NIST has gone to say, hey, don't require special characters, don't require password rotation, which again, it's in conflict with some other compliance requirements. But it's hard to implement those things in a cohesive and effective way, unfortunately. So we still recommend MFA and password management, things that can help you, because ultimately that the users are, there's going to be a relatively large percent of them that will be making strong passwords.
Awesome, thanks, Kevin. Yeah, and the final point here on the hardening organization is, again, touching back to that organizational domain safe list, is something that we haven't seen very often within organizations, but is something that I believe needs to be pushed out moving forward for just about everyone here, is that there needs to be a place that users can go to check whether or not a domain that they are on and loaded to in their browser because of the fact that they clicked on a link in an email is or is not trusted for your organization. And I think that covers it. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to enter them in the chat. Otherwise, feel free to check back. I believe we'll be putting the slides out. I'll try to add a link to that Microsoft Exchange external banner integration. Let me see here. And there should be a replay of this webinar that you'll be able to visit shortly. All right, I'm not seeing any questions. Hopefully that means I did a good job on covering any points. Here we go. Let's see one. How do attackers spoof the internal banners? So when you go into Exchange as an administrator and you add in a banner, if it's not just text, then it is turned into it's typically pasted in as HTML, but it definitely is rendered as HTML when the email is sent and loaded into an inbox. And all an attacker has to do is view the source of an email that includes a banner, and then even if there isn't things like, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds on HTML and CSS and things like that, but essentially an attacker can take sometimes you have to kind of fine tune between each target organization. Each external sender banner is different, but basically an attacker is going to use HTML and CSS a style tag to say, hey, this if the banner's at the top, okay, this first element that has a blue background that has this bold text of this size, I want to remove it. So they're basically making a pointer to where the banner is and hiding everything about it. Or they're saying hide that, and then in its place put this green banner that uses the same font and size, and put this inside it. And what they would put inside it might be that text that they noticed during recon is an internal banner. Hopefully that answers this question. But again, it is very trivial. I'll try to put a link to in the slide to, I believe it was, I don't know, bleeping something was the article domain. I'll try to post that article in here so that you can see it, and happy to follow up with you after the call, because one of the types of testing that we've been doing is kind of spot checks and saying, hey, how do you think that your sender banner could be spoofed? If not, let us try it. So we're happy to do that as well.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things where once the technique was posted about, we were all hitting ourselves like, oh, how do we not think of this before? Because basically, again, like Truman said, the root cause is HTML is a dynamic language. CSS and HTML, you can dynamically hide elements, do all these things, and the whole email is in HTML as well as the banner, which exists in HTML. So because of that, you can take control of it with the email where you control the HTML that you're sending into it. You can even do things potentially like hiding all tags and then only showing your explicit tags, so you can hide any banner that way. But I will say we have seen an improvement or a big focus when this technique came out a few months ago for anti-spam filters to try and hone into some of these things and try and block if they are seeing attempts to hide the banner. But it's one of those things where it's definitely a cat and mouse, right? Because yeah, you might be able to block the specific way that was shown in the blog post that people are commonly using, but there's a lot of ways that you can make it hard to signature because of the dynamism of HTML and CSS. And again, it's just the key thing to understand on why it's possible is just because the email is in HTML, the attacker controls the HTML going into it, they can include all that dynamism that is kind of programmatically or explicitly, even for if they know the banner, hide whatever banner they're trying to spoof. And because that banner doesn't exist or is injected above that level, it is part of the HTML and email. It is subject to all those dynamic controls that are hiding it. And there's at least right now, not a great way to ensure that it's not getting removed other than, a cat and mouse game of, anti-spam rules that are looking for those banner hiding techniques in the body of the HTML.
Yep, absolutely right. Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for expanding on that. Okay, well, I think that's it. We weren't able to get to all the questions here, but we will follow up with every single one of you that we weren't able to answer directly here on the webinar. We don't want to go over on time and want to be respectful of that. So I appreciate everyone joining today. And thanks, Kevin, for joining here with me. And we will see you all on the next one. Thank you very much for attending, and have a great day.